I'm going to be reading an entire Wikipedia article. However, it is in Hebrew Wikipedia, and I have used the auto-translate feature of Vivaldi to translate it. This is gonna be very fun because I have no... It doesn't make any sense. Letter. Letter. It is a written message from person one to the other. Recently, it has become customary for a letter to be written on paper and will be sent in an envelope. The role of the letter in communication human has changed fundamentally since the 19th century. Historically, letters have been the only reliable means of communication between two people who are distant from each other. With the development of the means of communication, the importance of letters as a routine means of the internet influenced communication decreased. The invention of telegraph, phone, each in turn, the customs of writing and sending letters. In modern industrial countries, correspondence has become a rarer practice, which has been largely replaced by advanced technologies such as the telephone and email. Letter writing has decreased to the point that the term letter is sometimes used when referring to a more formal message via email. Guard, and they were Historically, letters have existed since the days of... I can't pronounce English. Letters have existed since the days of ancient Egypt, part of culture Greece, Rome, and China to this day. Letters make up the contents of several books, New Testament, components of correspondence, private diplomacy, or business, serve as a primary source of information for historians. Advertisers. This is because of three main letters are still used, mainly by companies and advantages. No special equipment is needed at the recipient to receive the letter. This is... I'm gonna need to... No special equipment is required at the recipient to receive the letter. Almost every person has an address where they can be reached. All that is needed is mailbox at the recipient, unlike email or call phone where it is necessary to computer or on a phone for the recipient to receive the message. Physical evidence. When it comes to important messages, it is important to preserve evidence to the message. A letter can be kept more secure and easier. Required skills. For the purposes of using letters, for the purposes of communication, need to acquire written expression. To write a letter on a smooth white sheet, you could skills literacy suitable, like reading comprehension, use Charon. For the most part, these skills are imparted in childhood within school. In times and cultures where it is common in times and cultures where it is common illiteracy, to the Blair, he used to provide assistance to those interested in exchange for salary. Types of letters. This is actually really neat. Love letter. Letter love she through romantic for expression emotions love it. No, I can't. How the hell am I supposed to read this? It's freaking... How the fuck? Letter love she through romantic for expression emotions love in written form. The letter can contain a short message of love to a long mention of feelings, sometimes in poetic form. Love letters probably date back to the invention of the rote, and the earliest evidence is found in ancient Egypt. There is evidence of love writings from various regions throughout the history. Open letter. An open letter or open letter is a letter intended to be read by a wide audience, or a letter intended for an individual, but distributed widely in a deliberate manner. An open letter is usually written as if it were addressed to a specific person, but is made public through media such as the press or the internet. Often an open letter deals with a critical appeal to leader political. Chain letter. A chain letter is a letter that includes a message calling on the recipient to create a number of copies of the letter and pass them on to other recipients. Common methods used in chain letters include emotional manipulations using stories, heartbreakers, which quick pyramid schemes, and exploitations of superstitions to threaten the recipient with luck, evil, violence, or even death if he dares to break the change and not set the letter on. Agron. It is a reference book for writing letters. The book contains guidelines on the structure of the letter, common sentences, and standard letter formulas in a variety of fields, so that the author of the book can copy a letter from it as is, or with minor changes, and send it as a letter of its author. Confidentiality of the contents of letters. Privacy correspondence, or the confidentiality of the contents of letters, is a principle legal basic found in their constitutions of some European countries. Why do I do this to myself? The principle ensures that the contents of the signed letter will never be disclosed by a third party, and letters that are on their way to the recipient will not be opened by government officials or any third party. This is the main legal basis for the assumption that there is right to privacy in This principle has been extended to other measures of communication, including telephone calls and electric communications and internet. And in fact, there is a constitutional right to privacy in all modes of communication. There are exceptions to this rule of the law for privacy explicitly states, for example, when there is suspicion of doing crime or need arrests to prevent crime. In most countries, traditional letters on paper remained outside of the scope of enforcement powers, and their confidentiality was maintained. In the United States, there is no express constitutional right as to the confidentiality of personal correspondence. The confidentiality of the contents of letters was determined by case law courts based on the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Jewish. There is a prohibition. Jewish. There's a prohibition on reading letters and documents belonging to another. This prohibition is halacha established as boycott. That's not that's established as boycott by Rabbi Gershom of Orgola, one of the greats of Judaism, Ashkenazi, at the beginning of the 11th century. This boycott is commonly known as the boycott of Devno Gershom. The boycott was accepted by all Jewish communities over the generations. Israeli law. There is Israeli law. There is a constitutional right to privacy and personal correspondence. Basic law, human dignity and liberty. Itba states in Section 7D that the secret of a person's conversations, writings, or records should not be valued. The Privacy Protection Law, 5,741 to 1,981, states in Section 2.5 that violation of privacy is, among other things, copying the content of a letter or other writing and deliver publication, or using the right content without permission from the recipient or writer, all if the writing has no historical value and 15 years have not passed since its writing. For this purpose, writing, including an electronic message as defined in the Electronic Signature Law 5,761 to 2001, 9/11. A ban on opening letters also A ban on opening letters also exists on Postal Law 1986. The law defines opening a postal item by a postal clerk as a criminal offense punishable by imprisonment, unless there are circumstances that permit it, such as unless there are circumstances that permit it, such as lack of proper response or the recipient has died. The law also defines as a criminal offense the ultimate what? The law also defines as a criminal offense the opening of a letter by any person other than the recipient. Even those who have had some of this right, for example, in circumstances of psychiatric still retain their legal right in principle to send and receive closed letters, and special circumstances must exist for the violation of this right. Within military censorship in Israel, there is censorship of soldiers' mail, which is authorized to open letters sent via military mail, read them, and delete information from them. After reading the letter, it was closed with a sticker indicating that it had been opened by military censorship and sent to its destination. Over time, military censorship the importance of a letter to a historian. Letter written by an object biography can serve as an important source for understanding his worldview, ideas, and even his version of historical events that occurred during his time or in his parts, active or passive. The importance of the letter is that it brings authentic testimony from the time of the subject to the biography and can Writing is always personal, and careful reading can also shed a light on his personality of the writer. On the other hand, the letter is not written as certificate objective history. He does not bring the overall tractate to events that occurred at the time or before the writing. The writer can assume that certain details or events have been long known to the reader, the recipient of the letter, and is content with allusions. The writer's motives are sometimes unknown or unclear. Does he seek to glorify his name and attribute to himself actions in which he had little participation? Is he trying to justify an act that was done? Is he trying to convince the reader of something and bring an interpretation corrected, distorted to things or ideas certain? It is also important to note that things must be examined through the eyes of the estimated that the meaning of words, concepts, ideas, etc. have changed over time in an attempt to attribute a modern interpretation to them. The historian times can distort the writer's words. Another disadvantage typical of certain countries and typical of certain countries and periods, letters were seen and read by the authorities, and they would establish proof of guided toward both the writer and the recipient. So writers expect themes of care, insinuation, and lack of clarity. Indeed, there is a challenge in reading historical letters. Reading is always giving interpretation, a certain interpretation of what has already been written, an interpretation that depends on the reader's worldview, knowledge, and opinions. The attempt to understand the writer and his time should be disconnected from the reader's worldview. On the other hand, things should not be taken out of context, carried away, or misinterpreted. Publication of letters. The letters of famous leaders and people are of public interest, and these letters are often published, usually after the author's death of the book. Examples of this: Dear Esterline, letters 1924 to 1931, 1924 to 1931. The exchange of letters between S.Y. Agnon to his wife, published in 1983. What the? Carl Gustav Jung. Exchange of Letters 1906 to 1914 was published in Hebrew in 2008. Sigmund Freud. Walter Benjamin. Exchange of Letters 1933 to 1940 was published in Hebrew in 2008. Gershom Shalom. Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Holy Letters, Collection of Letters, 1944 and 1975, in Hebrew and Yiddish. 30 volumes so far was published starting in 1987. This video was dumb.